Ladies and gentlemen, just because the only people who want to immigrate to Australia are rich South African doctors doesn't mean that they can impose their strict regulations on the rest of society in terms of people who do actually have legitimate claims to moving, who do actually have a legitimate reason for seeking the welfare in these other countries. And that's what we contest, ladies and gentlemen, is that allowing for free immigration allows for the increased standard of living of people who really need it. And that's where our case clashed today. But before I get on to my positive matter, looking at the provision of aid, looking at things like the nomadic groups and how we're marginalizing them, I'm going to be dealing with a couple of issues of rebuttal that came up from side opposition. So firstly, what we need to look at was they spoke about our model and how brief it is and how unspecific it is. What we would say, ladies and gentlemen, is that the reason it's brief is because it's very simple. We simply think we're not allowing for the kind of profiling, the kind of arbitrary distinctions that are being made under the status quo. We think we're allowing for the only time we don't allow people in is when there's a real reason. So they're a murderer, ladies and gentlemen, that we think they're actually actively going to be harming society in that kind of tangible way. Further than this, though, in terms of their idea of our model, we'd say that it's not enough for them to simply say that it was brief. They needed to clash with the principle of it, ladies and gentlemen. They needed to clash with the morality of it in terms of why governments have the responsibility to protect people, in terms of the precedent that they've set for themselves, and the morality in other nations and other states. But now let's look at this idea of capacity. And what we heard from Bo here was an idea that was going to be simply unmanageable for us to sustain an economy or any kind of government when you had such a huge population. And firstly, what we'd say, ladies and gentlemen, is that in line with the analysis we brought to you, we think a lot of the people who are going to be going in are going to be skilled. But more than this, we think that even if they're not going to be people who are simply going to leech off the state. And we've seen this with groups like the Zimbabweans coming into South Africa, or even the Tunisians going into the EU, where they have, they're the people who are willing to work hard. They're the people who have nothing to lose, and so are willing to compete within the market. We think we're encouraging hard work. We're encouraging competition within that society. Further than this, when we look at the idea of it being a mechanism to allow criminals in, we say we firstly don't allow criminals in, but secondly we don't incentivize people to become criminals in order to get in. We allow for legitimate means. We allow them a safe and effective way for them to get some kind of standard of living. Further than this, when we look at the idea of the country who's actually governing the population, and this is what Bo came up and spoke to you about in terms of sovereignty and how you should have control over your own border. We simply asked him to come up and explain to us why they think this kind of sovereignty is so fundamentally important in today's society, particularly with ideas of globalization and a growing global culture in terms of why this is relevant at the moment, particularly now when we're allowing for at least the regulation or the understanding of exactly who is in your country, where you can still hold these people accountable because you know they're there, ladies and gentlemen. We say that Australia is still allowing all of these people into the country. They're just allowing them to do it illegally. And this means we can't hold them accountable. We don't know they're there. We can't actually ensure that they don't break the laws of our country. And we think that in terms of taking jobs, in terms of the slippery slope of leading to economic ruin, we say that they're not taking jobs, ladies and gentlemen. They're filling jobs that lazy English people simply don't want to do. We think that that's important for any economy. But now let's look at my positive matter. And here I'm going to be dealing with this free movement of aid as my first point. And here we simply say is that we're drawing two conclusions. Firstly, that we think it allows for refugees to effectively cross borders in order to access aid. And secondly, that it allows aid agencies to actually enter countries in order to provide this aid. And so what we would say is that a problem at the moment is in places like Somalia, places who don't allow aid into the country simply because they close their borders or they don't allow people in. We say that through this policy, in terms of our analysis, we'd force these kind of countries to do this. We'd force everyone to do it. And that's where our analysis lies. That's where our analysis in terms of providing for some kind of incentive for the effective provision of aid stands. And so the first problem in terms of refugees actually being able to access aid, here we say, countries like Somalia, which border countries like Kenya, where, aid agencies can't get into Somalia, so they set up provision sites in Kenya, where now the Somalians simply can't get across the border, simply can't get there to access the aid that is so fundamental for their survival. We say that we allow them the ability to do this. We allow them the ability to have some kind of access to something that's actually going to increase their standard of living. Further than this, though, we say it also incentivizes the legitimacy of the entering of aid agencies to these kind of countries, because now they have some kind of formal recourse because they're allowed to be there. We protect them from any kind of potential harms that may occur when they go in illegally, when they go in without the permission of whoever is in charge. And so what we would say is that we allow not only refugees to access aid in other countries, but we also think we increase the potential for more aid to be within these countries themselves. We think that that's important for the standard of living in any of the kind of countries that are so dependent on the kind of aid we're speaking about. But now if we look at the second idea, and here I'm going to be looking at groups like nomads and the cultural marginalization of these kind of groups. And while we understand that they may be a minority, we do believe that they are a group who are affected in terms of this policy. Go for it.
Is government saying overpopulation will destroy our economy a legitimate reason for rejecting people?
So, we don't think that overpopulation is going to destroy our economy. We think that, as I've already told you, you need to attack the analysis that we brought to you about the kind of jobs that these people are filling, about the kind of role that these people actually play in terms of the country, in terms of how they can send money back, in terms of how they actually can play a role in the economy of the country itself. But back to nomads, because we think they're important. We'd say that groups like African groups in Saharan Africa, groups like the Romani, we think that culturally it's part of their identity to move around and have no set home, no set boundary across which they cannot move. And what we say is that in terms of this culture, in terms of this belief, that is so intrinsic to their identity and the ability to practice their culture, we say that not allowing for free immigration, immigration infringes on this, because the border restrictions make it so much more difficult for them to move around, infringes on their cultural norms. And when we look at the kind of unnecessary problems that result from this kind of thing, firstly we say that we don't think that they're going to buy into the country which they're stuck in, because they're forced to be there, ladies and gentlemen. We think that this is not good for the functionality of the government, for the way they interact with people within that country. Further than this, though, we say that this is an undermining of their own culture, of their cultural norms. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we say that imposing these kind of norms on a group fundamentally undermines our own cultural norms, our own beliefs in terms of liberalism. We don't think we should be imposing beliefs on any culture. We believe that anything that is intrinsic to the identity of a person, as long as it doesn't harm another, is important. We think that this kind of policy doesn't harm other people. We think it fills a gap in the market. It allows for skills to be created. It allows for shortages to be filled. We think they need to come up here and clash with an analysis that was brought up in my first speaker speech, which simply hasn't been rebutted. Thank you.